the end. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Looking forward to share what I know about stone walls. So I'm just going to try and start up my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to show you a lot of photographs and images. It's more, as much a slideshow as really as a talk, but you know, picture says 1,000 words. So hopefully you'll enjoy some of these photographs. See? Okay, I hope you all can see that.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Rory.
So first off, just a little bit about myself, because I know some of you from different talks with Burren, and I know there's some people there who I've worked with tour guiding and on the road up and down the country. I'm a tour guide, stonemason. I do a lot of heritage work. Born in the UK, believe it or not, but raised in South Galway in the family farm. So my grandfather said we were born between a rock and a hard place. So we grew up with stone walls, like anyone in the Burren lowlands or the Burren. And as you cross the countryside, like in the photograph there, if you knocked a wall, you built a wall. And that was it. It was a craft you learned. It was just part of everyday life. So I went off and studied history and archaeology, but I always kept the stonework going, and it actually paid for my beer in college as much as my studies, I have to say. But I did build stone walls for about 20 years. I'll tell you a bit about the type of walls I've built and a lot of the projects I've worked on. Done a lot of training with people building walls, do a lot of heritage work, but most of my time now is guiding, tour guiding, which of course this year is very, very quiet, but anyway, hopefully it'll pick up next year. So as I say, I'm just going to show you and tell you a little bit about what I know about walls. And of course, I will be looking at as a tour guide, as a local historian, but also as a stonemason. So I'll give you an insight. I'm going to look at the Burren and also the Burren lowlands. So people are very familiar with the Burren, but the Burren lowlands, that area goes east from the Burren Hills, right across South Galway, Gort, Ardrahan, over as far as Kilcrease, really. A wonderful area in terms of geology and history as well. So I'm going to look at a lot of the places I've worked and projects I've worked on, and we'll just see if I can, again, just show you the different types of walls, a little bit the history of the walls, etc., and the future of the walls, which is very important. So we're just going to start by looking at the two main types of wall. So we're just going to start looking at this. So there's two main types. There's the single stone wall and the double stone wall. Okay, you see there's two images there. So a single stone wall is 1 stone in thickness. There's no mortar or cement to hold it up. It's built dry. In general, bigger stones at the bottom, getting smaller towards the top. It depends on friction to stand up. There's a lot of different styles of construction. Now, what's very important here, when we talk about the different types of stone wall, the type of wall you have all depends on its function, but also, it's really, really important, is the stone available locally? Now, you see when that's important, because the Burren, while it's a small enough area, there's a lot of variations in its landscape. It goes from uplands with lots of karst limestone to very fine, fertile lowlands and valleys. So it is very diverse, and different types of stone. So this is the classic wall in the Burren. So it's a stacked or wedge wall. And you can see how the stones are sort of stacked up together, you know, bigger at the smaller at the bottom, and if you see the profile, it sort of tapers in towards the top. Okay, there's a good picture of it there. And it's usually kept fairly vertical, but it gets a bit mad sometimes, gets a bit electric. That one is from Slieve Carn. Sometimes, remember these walls, some of them will have stood since the medieval period and would have fallen, been repaired, and many, many different hands and generations would have worked on them. So there's a number of different people over generations working on them. So they go a little bit crooked and sideways, a bit like us all as we get older. Some are more electric than others, depending on the local style or the local family or the local people who are building it. And one farm could have different walls than the next farmer. So these will have uprights going right from the bottom to the top, and they give it great strength, you know, great strength. Well, that's a typical uplands wedge or stack wall. And that really wall is typical of a wall that could come from the early medieval period right to last week. I've seen walls built like that a year ago, you know. Looks the very same. Maybe there might be a bit more lichen or lichen on the older walls, but apart from that, you couldn't tell by the style. Now again, in the valleys in the Burren, they're green and fertile. You don't have that angular stone that is picked straight off the pavement. You have rounded boulders, rounded by the glaciers. So this is your typical boulder wall, as I call it. Now it's like building footballs for anyone who's stonemasons there. Knows a few stonemasons listening. It's very hard to get them to stand together because they roll off so easy. Much, much easier to build the walls on top of the Burren Hills, the stacked walls. That's a typical example from the Burren lowlands. That's between Kinvara and Ardrahan. But you'll find the same in the valleys that run in Uptama or anywhere like that. That's near Fidon Castle. You can see the light coming through. And that's one of the amazing things about the stone walls. You can see through them. It's enough to make a sheep think, I'm not going to jump this wall because the wall is going to fall on me and I'm going to get hurt here. Sheep are cautious animals. So it's enough to scare them off, but also more importantly, it allows the wind blow through them. They act like a net, not a sail. So look at that wall on top of the Burren Hills there. If you had a solid block wall there, I tell you, in a year, that would be blown straight down. It would catch the wind and would blow down. But because of the holes in it, the wind actually blows through and stays. Now, they still need to be repaired every so often, but it functions very well. Now, the double stone wall, this is a much more solid construction. It's got two faces of stone, one on each side. The center is filled with small stones, sometimes mortar as well, if it's a pointed or if it's a cement used. The best example is follow a number of general rules. 2-on-1, so you're breaking your joints all the time. The length of the stone going into the wall rather than upright, so this makes it stronger. They have a batter and a cap, and there's through stones. And they can be pointed using cement or lime mortar, which is the traditional way of building, or they can be dry without cement, okay? So there's the drawing I did of the typical double stone wall. This one's interesting. You can see here, if you can see the cursor, the foundation, sometimes not concrete, they just dig down into the subsoil, put down a wider base of stone. And you can see, you know, the stone's lengths are into the wall. That's the face. And it's a batter, so it's tapering in towards the top. Through stone that protrudes sometimes either side gives it great strength. It ties the two faces together. Small stones in the middle and a cap on top. There's loads of different types of cap. You all probably know them to see on walls around the country. Big one and a small one, big one and a small one. Cow and calf, duck and drake. Different names like that are often. Soldiers, all standing in a row, all the same height. So that's a lovely example from Kilmacduagh. Beautiful, beautiful. Always very good land around Kilmacduagh and the monastic sites. And you need a good strong wall when you have good arable land because you don't want cattle breaking into that. And that one probably dates from the mid part of the 19th century. Beautiful. You can see the through stones there. You can see them every metre or so coming out. Beautiful through stones. You see the base, the batter, and the cap. Okay. Lovely, lovely example. Beautiful walls around that area. Now it's the Fedging wall. Now this is my favorite. For me, this is the king of the walls of the Burren. This is so symbolic of the Burren. You've got here, it's like a hybrid. It's like half a double stone wall and half a single stone wall. So the first maybe 18 inches or so is like a double stone wall. And then you have a single on top. So that base that's a double makes it strong. And they're beautiful walls. Now, sometimes there are these uprights in them. Now, in the Aran Islands, Tim Robinson recorded that these were called mother stones. These are the children's stones. So you have the mothers here, and these are the children they're sort of minding. Again, very strong. You find them a lot, these in the uplands, again, in the Burren. I'll show you a couple of lovely pictures. There's one. That's, you can see the mother stones here, and it's protruding up from the double base into the single wall. So it's given extra strength. As he really needs to stack those stones, you lean them up against him. Now, the Fedging wall is also found in the lowlands. And again, the round stones you found there can be built into a Fijian wall. So there you go. You have this sort of, these stones here at the bottom, small round stones. And these are picked from the fields. These are basically when they're making the fields, they're picking the stones, they're building it into a small base, and then they have the larger stones on top, okay? You can see it here. So these are typical of the South Galway lowlands, and also again, the valleys in the Burren. And if you headed up even north from South Galway up towards Chew, most famous road in Ireland, the N17, stone walls and the grass is green. This is what you'll see all the way up, Fijian walls built to these sort of boulder stones. So I'm going to try and look at a history and evolution of the walls. So this may interest people and give you an idea of dating walls. Now, first thing, that's Paul na Brón there. The last number of years, a lot of amazing work being done in archaeology in the Burren. Marion O'Dowd, with her work with bone, being found in different caves around Ireland. They found a bare bone that was in storage that came from a cave in County Clare, which brings back Irish archaeology to about 12,500 years ago, the Paleolithic, which is quite amazing. So this bare bone had been worked by a person, so it shows that there was humans here. And of course, Michael and Elaine Lynch did a great talk recently on shell middens from 7,000 years ago in Doolin and Fanor, showing that people were down at Doolin enjoying seafood way before O'Connor's in Doolin. But really, it's when the first farmers come. This is when we see the first stone walls, and that's what Paul na Brón is from the Neolithic, as a 3,800, 3,200 BC. So these farmers come. They start cutting down the trees. The area is heavily forested. You can see our man here with a stone axe head, which probably came from Doolin, cutting down the trees. They're picking the stone out of the ground, and they're creating fields for their crops and their animals, their livestock. And they're picking the stones out of the land, and you can see it here, and they're building the first stone walls. Okay. So I'm going to look at an example here, and there's great work done here in the Burren in Parkabina on Ruhan Hill, and there was a survey done there by Carlton Jones, archaeologist, and he was surveying the whole landscape really. And this here is a wedge tomb from end of the Neolithic Bronze Age, early Bronze Age. And here, this is an aerial photograph of Ruhan Hill. And we're looking down from above, and you can just see all these lines and these little small circles. These are the settlements, and these are all what we call mound walls. Now, if you're walking across the Burren, you'll notice as you walk, these linear grassy mounds, mound walls. Now, these are collapsed prehistoric walls, okay? And once you get your eye in, you'll see them everywhere. But again, they're best seen from the air. Now, Carlton Jones, he tried to date some of these during his work there. So what he did is he looked at all the different walls in that area of Ruhan Hill, Parkabina. Some walls overlapped each other. So the newer walls went over the older mound walls. So he knew that the mound wall was older. And he used a technique of measuring the pedestal underneath these mound walls to gauge their age or date. Now, this is a very simple drawing I did, very simple I did it today. So this is the bedrock of limestone. Limestone is very soft, erodes away, of course, with rainwater. So you had a wall originally here in the Neolithic, early Bronze Age time. That wall collapsed. What happens is after sort of the Bronze Age, there is climate change and rains more. The uplands are depopulated and left. And these fields are left behind. And basically the walls fall down and earth begins to cover over them. So when they fall down, stones fall either side. Oh, sorry now. Go back there. They fall either side. And basically, over time, the bedrock is eroding from the rainwater. So this bit of rock underneath the base of the wall, the pedestal, is being protected by the base stones. And so the stone either side of the collapsed wall, the bedrock erodes more. So that height there, by measuring that height there, they're able to work out the age of the walls. Amazing work, really. They say, I think it's 100 years, it erodes down about the thickness of a tissue. Now, it's quite complicated and there's a lot of problems with it, but it is a real attempt to try and date the walls. So he looked at them, and he looked at these mound walls, and he looked at settlements associated with them on the landscape, and he concluded that these walls dated back to about 2400 to 2000 BC, and some perhaps even older, back to the very start of the Neolithic in the Burren. So mound walls, these are the very first. So these are our Caja fields. Caja fields in Mayo, Professor Caulfield dates them back to 5500 BC. In Mayo, of course, you've peat bog, but it's sort of the opposite affected in the Burren. Things eroded away, you know, over farming, and more bare karst limestone was exposed. So we'll just carry on. Talara Castle, an amazing site, which has, well, people don't really know, is it a hill fort? Is it a Neolithic settlement? Is it a seasonal gathering place? But on top of the hill, you have this huge circular, well, hill fort for a better word. Steffenberg, the archaeologist, doing a lot of work. But it's got this circular enclosing wall, which is collapsed as well. So this was one hell of a structure. So again, probably dates from the end of the Neolithic Bronze Age. It's about 3 meters in diameter, and probably was about 3 meters tall. Now, I don't really understand how it collapsed so much. It's like what would have been a big, huge castle wall, but the way it's collapsed, I'd love to try and reconstruct some of these walls sometime. It'd be fantastic to do an audit of all these walls and try to do some reconstruction work. I know Ken Curran there from the Dry Stone Walling Association. I'm sure he'd love to take on that project. Thomas J. Westrup, great antiquarian, the last century, he described the walls, and you can see the little drawing he made them. So he had these stones up on edge and smaller ones in between. So you can just read there itself. 9 to 12 feet thick. The builders first laid small tins of slab on the crag till they were fairly level, and then they built the entire thickness of the wall with large slabs. The sides of the gateway are faced with slabs set on end. So, you know, these large slabs with smaller stones inside. So that's a fairly major construction. It's probably one of the biggest major construction early in our prehistory in the East. So we're going to move on to the next big phase of wall building. And there's 4 major phases. I said prehistoric, early medieval. Then we go on to the 18th, 19th century and the modern, which I'll be finishing on. So this is Carcommon. So the early medieval, early Christian period, 400 to 1169, which is when, of course, the Normans arrive. And that's normally what's used around the country, because the Normans didn't have as much effect in the Burren and the Burren lowlands as in other parts of Ireland. And in fact, the old Gaelic old Gaelic clans held power right up into the 15th, 16th century, and land ownership. So during the Bronze Age, the uplands are depopulated. People seem to leave the area. Trees grow back again. They can tell that by the pollen analysis. And it's not really until the early medieval period that we see people coming back into the region again. And settlements are sort of surround these castles. These stone castles are forts. Now, Carcommon has 3 rings. It's backed onto a cliff, so it sounds like a promontory fort. Fantastic place to go and walk to, it really is. It's like our Dunengasa. You can see the aerial photography of it there. You can see the cliff on the far side. You can see some of the rings here. It really is fantastic. And they had these radial walls between them. So, next slide. That's a castle wall is like a large double stone wall. Huge, big, some of the stones in it are just gigantic, and how they move them and lift them is a challenge in itself. So like huge double stone walls. And this period is when you see the first double stone walls, really. You have clans, and you're sort of seeing the beginning of townlands, and you have Marin walls, or walls between different areas. But that's one of the radial walls here. And again, this is what the archaeologists often call a slab wall. Now, a slab wall is really, for me, is a stacked or wedged wall that's collapsed. just that you see the top of it sticking up. So you can see it along this photo here. They're like dominoes that are falling over. I think that's what Carlton Jones says. It's like dominoes have all fallen over. And every so often you see a big one and a small one, a big one and a small, which is perfect for the stonemason. You like to have a big one and a small one, so you can sort of lean the next one up against it. It just goes on. So that's one of the radial walls between the rings of the Carricombe Hill Fort. And that's one just outside. So actually, if I just go back, actually, that's actually, I can't see here, I think the first one I show is the one between the walls there, and that's the other one just outside. So they're all associated with it. So that's really slab wall. Early Christian period, of course, you have a lot of monastic signs. In terms of stonework, there's some fabulous stonework being done. Lime mortar started being used in church buildings. This is Uchtmama. And again, the church had a lot of land as well, and there's a lot of walling in there in that beautiful valley of Uchtma. Just to mention that as well, of course, Kilmacduagh, highest round tower in Ireland. So there's lots of construction. Kilfenora, the crosses. So as you move from really into the 10th, 11th, 12th century, a lot of churches being built in stone in the area. Now we're moving on to the late medieval period. Now just going back to, I should also say, that whole early Christian period, that whole early medieval period, the unit of currency was cattle. Now, even today, the wealth of the west of Ireland is cattle, okay, farming. All the Burren area was mostly grazing, cattle grazing, and the walls and the fields were associated with cattle, not so much arable. There was probably some, but not so much. Cattle was the great source of wealth. And that cattle-based economy lasts longer, I think, in the Burren lowlands and in the Burren than other places, because the native Irish clans actually hold power longer. So the O'Loughlin's, the O'Briens, our crowd, in South Galway, the O'Shaughnessy's. So they start building castles, tower houses, copying the Normans. So this is Fidon, which is an O'Shaughnessy tower house, and it's a really well protected tower house. So it's very like the Cashel. The Cashel circular defence like Carricombe. When there was raiding, they brought the cattle inside the walls of the Cashel. Fidon with its outer bawns and bawns, which is this wall around, it's a bawn wall, which actually comes from the word for cow bow. It's where you brought your cattle in when you're being attacked or raided. So Fidon here, has a bawn wall, but it's also an outer bawn, this area here, which is 15 acres, a huge area. It has a little, oh, my head has gone there. There's a little tower just on the outer wall there, outer wall here. The wall would have gone along here, the little moat here. A little drawbridge would have been there. It's a very defended site. But just to show you some of the stuff you can find in walls, this is one of the outer walls out along here. And they took away the ivy here. This is a gun loop. So it just shows you have to, when you're looking at any monuments, just be wary of the walls. A great friend of mine, Christy Caniff, whenever you go with Christy to a church site, one of the first things he does, a graveyard, he walks around the wall in the graveyard, and he looks at the stone on the wall. Sure as anything, there'll be a slab or part of a grave or a tomb or something. You always find stuff in walls, which makes restoring walls really interesting. But they are, again, working in the same sort of cattle-based economy. Now we're going to move on to the 18th, 19th century. Of course, the old Gaelic order, after the Battle of Boyne, they lose their lands. The land ownership changes. You have the large landed estates. This is Talara Castle, Examall, sorry about the typo there, which is in Ardrahan, beautiful, beautiful place. Now, I had the pleasure of working here. When I started off as stonemason, this is where we started. It's previously the home of Edward Martin, who's the gentleman on the right, one of the founders of the Abbey Theatre, first president of Sinn Féin, helped bring stained glass industry into Ireland. And my grandfather actually used to push him around a wheelchair. It's only up the road from me when he was older. And it was bought at one stage, it was swapped for a yacht. And it was in terrible state when the Beaumeyers bought it, Rud and Femi Beaumeyer. Dutch couple, and they started to restore the wall garden. So I started off working in the wall garden. And it's in the 18th, 19th century, the old Gaelic order has, again, lost their land. The land has been divided up, these large estates, and again, there's more walls and different types of walls being built. So you have wall gardens, you have all sorts of things to do, demesne walls, etc. So it's not just the big house, of course, parklands, ornamental walks, winding avenue, wall garden, formal garden. So that's me there when I had hair, fine black head of black hair. That's the first arch I built. That was in the wall garden at Talara, which is here, just down here, that arch. That was like a cattle field. It was just muck when we came in there first. And I started off working with a local man, John Fury, who's a good friend of mine, passed away, unfortunately, 2 years ago after illness. Fantastic stonemason. He'd make a much more interesting talk than I ever would. He did mostly cut stone work, but a bit of everything. And I know the tour guides watching will know exactly where he is, at least I hope you do. It's Glasnevin Cemetery. And John erected that monument in Glasnevin. It was one of the last jobs he did, unfortunately. And it was very controversial at the time because it remembered all the British and Irish who died in 1916. And he was under police protection while putting it up. It was paint bombed and every sort of thing. But brilliant stonemason. But that's where I started off. So it's 18th, 19th century again. You have these large estates, country houses, wall gardens, and everything that go with it. So it's a wall garden. A different type of wall, used of course for protecting the different plants and fruit trees and everything from the elements, creating an artificial climate. You have the demesne wall around the estate, and then beautiful ashlar. Ashlar is when you get really finely cut stone and you have really fine joints, tight joints between it. That's the gateway of Talara Castle, which many of you might see on the road between Ardrahan and Gort. It's in private hands now, actually. Cool Park, just up the road. Again, it's a place I worked both as a tour guide and a stonemason. Lucky enough to say there's Lady Gregory, wonderful Lady Gregory, the autograph tree. And the reason I'm showing you this is because the estate, Cool Park, was actually bought from the Martins, Edward Martin's family, by the original Gregory, Robert Gregory, who had been a descendant of William Gregory, who was married to Lady Gregory. And he was quite the farmer, and he establishes different fields and builds walls between these different fields. He was bringing all these new ideas of agriculture. So that's the house, and this is the walls and grounds, and of course the famous wall garden where you have the autograph trees here. So he really was quite the guy. This is like a style I helped to restore in these, in the woods in Cool. Now, when you go to Cool Park now, it's all woods. But that's because after Lady Gregory sold up the house after her son died, the forestry took it over and planted forestry all across these fields. So you've got these stone walls now running through the fields. This is the lime kiln. A lot of these walls use lime mortar. So those of you who don't know lime mortar, you basically get stone, limestone, you put it into the kiln, you burn it for 48 hours. You're basically burning the carbon out of it. You take it out here at the end, and the stone is sort of lightened and it's sort of white, and you mix it with sand to make mortar. And basically, the air reintroduces the carbon to the mix, and it sets. It's excellent, lovely stuff to work with. All right from the Romans right up to the early part of the 20th century used lime mortar.
Rory, just because you asked, just a 10-minute warning for you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we know that a lot of these walls were built around 1776. Okay, so there's a lovely quote there. I'll let you read through it. So I'm going to start flying through these now. That's a ha-ha at Cool, type of wall. You can see the drawing underneath. So Cool Park used to look down on to the Cool Lake before the trees were planted. And a ha-ha, the house would be up here, and you could look down over it without seeing the wall. It wouldn't obstruct your view. And I got the word ha-ha because the guys out hunting would come along their horse, and they'd come riding along here. They'd ride up, and then they wouldn't see the wall. And next minute, the horse would be jumping over the wall and go, ha-ha! They'd land down, okay? A ha-ha. Ha-ha. That's a deer wall at Carron, which we worked with the Burren program with local farmers just as a training course. And I went there the other week and I was delighted. We couldn't find the repair, which is exactly what we wanted. A very, very high wall used to keep deer. It just shows you the type of things you'll get. Again, 18th, 19th century. Our tour guides will know probably the most famous landlord in the Burren, or just south of the Burren at the Cliffs of Moher, Cornelius O'Brien, who is said to have built everything in West Clare except the cliffs. Well, he had a wager one time with a man that could build a stone wall 6 foot high by an inch thick. Impossible. Of course, if you've been to the West Clare, you'd have seen the Scanner's flagstone, which is very thin, and that's what he did. And that's the same sort of wall that protects all the tourists from the cliffs, even today. Just on the Famine, that's the Curlarta, the Famine Road in the Burren. And you have these retaining walls. There's Famine Walls. I'm a bit nervous when people talk about Famine Walls going up over the mountains. A lot of those walls were built way before the famine. But unless you've got historical evidence to back it up, it's very hard to call them a famine wall, as we know. These are turf tiles, which you find in the Burren, another feature, where people would have got cow dung and dried it out and burnt it in the fire. So they're very unique, really, to the Burren. Turf tiles. And poor people during the famine that said to have used them. Just Michael Cusick's cottage. Just put that slide in there because I'm just going to talk towards the end of the 19th century. You have change in land ownership again. After the famine, a lot of the estates go bankrupt. The land is divided up amongst the farmers who buy it out. And so there's more walls built. So the real wall of the 19th century is the Fijian wall. This is a wall which people would use to separate their arable crops from where they keep cattle. It's much harder for an animal to get over that wall. If you had a single wall between grazing land, if an animal went into someone else's grazing, it's not the end of the world. But if a cow went into someone's potato or barley, that's it for the year, you know. Just one of the things you find in walls, that's a wall near where I live in home. It's an old double stone wall. That's a dugeen pipe. You can see just where I found it inside the wall. Quite amazing. 18th century artifact, dugeen, little pipe, clay pipe. These are the modern walls onto concrete block. Now, really, these are feature walls. And part of your planning permission in Galway and Clare, you have to have a stone wall outside your house. And some are excellent. Some of them don't follow the rules of stonemasonry, but they're good and bad like everything else. That's just some of the work I did. That's my saying I wouldn't even say this. My pandemic pier. I was building that during the pandemic. But stonework, the traditional work, can still make beautiful walls today. Look at this. This is between a house in Ardrahan, between two houses. Look at that beautiful stack style wall. It's beautiful. Look at this house in Karen. They have used the Fijian style to make a beautiful wall outside their house. You know, really lovely dry stone walls. Now, the JCB wall, some people don't like it, traditionalists don't like it. Huge, big chunks of stone built to make a wall. Farmers love them. Practical, keep cattle in, and they're better than a fence, wooden fence, lasts longer. A lot of them are built really skillfully, and there's a lot of really, really good JCB drivers who would be stonemasons driving JCBs. And if you went back to the Neolithic and think if they couldn't build a wall like that, they wouldn't. Of course they would. Just some of the features. Pillar stones, just going to fly through these. And the gates, have a look at the gates, beautiful gates. The styles, that's a lovely one at Kilmaclua. This one here is near Upmama. The Baronet or gap, now this is more common in the Aran Islands where they don't have gates. So just take out the stone between the two upright pillars to make a gap which could go between fields. Baronet. Now this is one people are always talking about. A sheep's pass, different names. Quicket, sheep's creep. I always call them a poutine or a hog hole. So they allow sheep pass through one field to the other and cattle can't. Some say used for weaning lambs. Some say for leprechauns from passing from one field to the next. There's all sorts of different things. It's a lovely one there with style. So the farmer goes over the wall, the sheepdog goes through the style. Beautiful, beautiful ones. Now, they weren't all for sheep. I tell you, I never saw a sheep go through one of those. That's only about 6 inches wide. That's up on, just looking over Bell Harbour. So hunting, snaring, to let water through. Lots of other functions as well. And you get bee bowls in England too, and different things in walls. These are very unique to the Burren. Up on the hills, you have these cross-shaped or T-shaped stock shelters. So up there in the winter grazing, the winterage, it gives them shelter. So you're using the stone walls to give the animals shelter. Cattle enclosures are moher, circular cattle enclosures. You'll find them all over. Now, just to mention, just finishing up now, just the Burren today. Now, if you're interested, there's loads of fantastic books available on stone walling and also on the Burren wall. Great book there. The guru of stone walls in Ireland, Patrick McAfee, Irish Stone Walls, fantastic. On the archaeology, the Burren and the Aran Islands, Carlton Jones, fantastic, and a brilliant, brilliant book. If you want one book on the Burren wall itself, Gordon Darcy, artist, gardeners can do anything. Just a brilliant, brilliant book for anyone who's interested. I've been lucky enough, I've worked with Burren Bio in teaching people the skills of walling, and the only way we're going to preserve the walls is to keep the craft alive so new generations can go on repairing walls and building new walls. I've also worked with the Burren programme and Farming for Nature. Brendan Dunford hopefully might say a few words later on and tell you about the brilliant work they've done. I've been working teaching farmers how to repair walls, which I have to say is like teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. These guys could teach me more than I ever know. But I guess when someone comes in and tells them how brilliant these walls are, they appreciate them all more, and it builds up a pride, and they have done fantastic work. In fact, that's just, since 2010, there's 124 kilometers of wall repaired in the Burren. And also, look at the gates. They've gone back to traditional sort of strip iron gates, very similar to the ones I've showed you. I've also been lucky enough to work with a number of tour groups who've come to the Burren, different university groups from the States mostly. And you can see some of these girls here building with their sunglasses on. I wonder what the first farmers would have thought of this, but I tell you one thing, I miss Americans this year. They're so enthusiastic. You can see here the girls here, they put a stone on the wall. They're working together as teams, like cheer every time to put one stone on the wall. It's just amazing. And there's something for everybody building stone walls. You know, everybody can play a role in it. It's one of those jobs, I have to say, so many people don't see the end product of what they do. But in stonework, you're working out nature, you're not looking at limestone itself, you're looking at the history, 350 years of history, the fossils. There's a bird singing, there's flowers, you're in the fresh air, it's quiet. And you're working away and you're seeing what you build. And when you see that finished product, you know, there's a great reward to that, you know, it really is. And repairing walls is something where we can give back to nature. And they really, really do get something. And I must admit, for me, it's great working with different students and different people coming from outside Ireland to build stone walls, because it actually, you know, it gives me re-enthusiasm. Sorry, that's not how that didn't come out right, but you know what I mean. So, of course, I was going to say it's good enough for a king. With the Prince of Walls, Charles, when he came to Ireland, he had a go at the walls himself. So the future with the walling is bright. Now, in the Burren, we're very lucky in that there's a lot of work going on, but other parts of the country maybe not so much. But the Dry Stone Walling Association of Ireland has done fantastic work. You can go on Facebook and see a lot of the work that they have done. It's a great place for different stone wallers to come together and share experiences. And one of the great things they've done, they all came together to the Gathering of Stones, which shows all the different styles of stone from around the country. And I know we have Ray Curran from the Dry Stone Walling Association, and during the questions, he might tell us a little bit about a project they're working on. And to see dry stone wallings to be included in a listing from UNESCO of the intangible cultural heritage, which would be fantastic, you know. I know Burren Bio had the Winterage enter on that list. And when you think of the Burren and County Clare, now I love hurling, and as a Galway man, proud Galway man, it's a very soft border between Galway and Clare. 95, we were all shouting for Clare when I got the All-Ireland, and Anthony Daly, we lifted the cup. He said, we love our music and dancing, but we love our hurling too. But I think you could put in dry stone walls there as well. And when you think of Clare, is there anything more you can think of? Music, traditional music, hurling, even though they're not as good as Galway, and dry stone walling. So I'm just going to finish up there. I know there's a lot of people might have some questions to ask. And I thank you all again for listening. I hope I haven't bored you too much or confused you too much. And what I say to you is get out into the Burren whenever you get a chance. It's great. This days of social distancing, there's loads of places to go, walks, loads of trails. Burren Bio has loads of walks and talks, and go out and enjoy the walls when you're doing that. It's part of that. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Rory. That was absolutely fantastic. You managed to combine a lot of information in that very short period. Would Kenneth OCallaghan of Dry Stone Wall Association like to talk? I've asked you to unmute you, Kenneth, I think.
Hello. Thank you very much, Rory, for an excellent presentation. Very enjoyable. And thanks very much as well for asking me to speak. I wouldn't have missed the presentation for a minute, but it's great to be here to just maybe talk about Dry Stone Wall Association. We were formed in 2009 to promote the craft of dry stone walling, and you've shown some of our projects there that we're very, very proud of indeed. But one of the things that we're working on at the moment is an application to UNESCO to further what you mentioned, which is in 2018, UNESCO inscribed the art of dry stone walling and its techniques after an application from 8 other European countries, which were Croatia, Spain, France, Greece, Italy, Slovenia, and Switzerland. And in 2019, after an application by the Dry Stone Wall Association to the Irish government, dry stone was added to our own inventory. So earlier this year, we were invited to make an application to UNESCO. And as a result, we're now hoping to find as many groups, individuals like ourselves that promote dry stone or are actively involved in practicing it or teaching it, for letters of support and for maybe to get in touch with us. And you can, things like what we're looking for is, as I said, letters of support, but maybe images, videos, stories or anecdotes that demonstrate dry stone intangible cultural activity, and especially the transfer of that knowledge to show that it's alive in our community and that it's being transferred, because I think what achieving that can do is it can perhaps give us connections outside of Ireland too, like you showed before with people coming from America. Perhaps we can share our knowledge with people from continental Europe, and likewise, and between us, we can keep our very long-standing traditional craft of dry stone building going into the future.
Thanks, Kenneth. That sounds wonderful. I hope people will get in touch with you. Is that the website that they can access your contacts on?
Yeah. Contact us via the website. Our email address is info@dswai.ie. We'd love to hear from people. We will be actively contacting groups ourselves anyway, but at any stage we'd love to hear from someone, and we can help hopefully put a good application into UNESCO together.
That's great. The very best of luck to you, Kenneth. Rory, I'll go with the first question from Katrina Costello. One thing I would really like to know, she says, have we any evidence, or can we even speculate, that Dún Urgus, please pardon my pronunciation, on Blackhead may date back to the Bronze Age? Or have we any walls left from the Neolithic period in the Burren?
Oh, from the Neolithic period, yeah. First off, Carson Jones' work in Parkabina shows that those walls there, those mound walls, would date from the Neolithic. Now, some walls would have a continuity. Not all of them fell away, some of those boundaries were still kept. Sometimes the fields themselves, we talk about the fields, were made bigger or smaller, usually bigger, because the Neolithic, there was sort of more small scale arable farming. And those fields, a lot of those walls were let go in between. So some of the outer boundary ones are walls that could have continued right from that date. It's impossible really to date them unless you can find some sort of artifact to give you a date from. Some you can radiocarbon date. But I would say that definitely are some of the walls standing do date from that time. As for on Blackhead, I don't think there's ever been any excavation up there. I've been up there myself once or twice on that site. I think it's probably a cashel. What I would think would be like an early Christian period, but again, unless there was an excavation or something datable up there, it's hard to know.
Also, would you know, is the stone walling in the Burren very unique to this place as a limestone landscape? Would you have similar examples from other limestone landscapes in the world?
Yeah. Well, in the world, first off, within Ireland, of course, the Aran Islands share the same geology as the Burren, and the walls there are pretty much the same. I have to say, as much as I love the Burren, the Aran Islands really have special walls. And there's a stone festival out there in Inishir every September, and they just are unbelievable place to go to, particularly in Inishir. Up and down Ireland, of course, the beautiful stone walls are down around Dingle. Anyone heading down around Dingle, and a lot of my tour guides friends will tell you about the beautiful walls down around there. Donegal, all on the western seaboard, Caja Fields up in Mayo. And then there's different types of walls that go around the country. So you go down to Wexford, there's like a herringbone style wall, which is totally different than anything else. County Down, you have the Boulder Wall, huge big Mourne boulder wall. Across the world, Scotland, of course, has the Galloway Dyke rather than a wall is what they call it. And where Irish immigrants went to the States and parts of Australia, Kentucky, I think particularly, you find stone walls that were built by Irish immigrants. So you do find stone walling, and there's a lot of stone walling groups around the world. And Ireland is the mecca for a lot of those groups, and Ken will tell you that.
Thanks for that, Rory. Just to let you know, there's fantastic comments coming in and there have been viewers from as far away as Australia and Norway and UK. So there's Brendan Dunford is here. Would you like to ask a question, Brendan?
Yeah, and not helping translate the questions. Thank you, Rory, for a fantastic talk. As Brendan said earlier, we normally have these tea talks in Tubber Hall. Given the crowd tonight, about 200 odd people, I think poor Michael O'Donoghue, our host, would be under a lot of pressure making tea and hosting people. We wouldn't have fitted. So thanks, Rory, for entertaining us all so well. Bunch of questions. Michael Gilmartin wanted to know, well, why do people build walls up the side of hills where there's hardly any foliage, any grazing?
Well, Brendan, you're the very man to answer that question rather than me, because the Burren is quite unique in that we have winterage. So, and even for a lot of people driving through the Burren, and they look up at these hills and say, well, there's nothing up there. Why is there walls built? But anybody that's walked up there knows there's lots of really fine grassland up there. And of course, this is where the Burren farmers traditionally have brought their cattle up from Halloween right into spring. So they're dividing up land holdings. And many people see these walls going over the mountains and think they're famine walls. But a lot of those date before the famine, and again, are different family holdings. So that's why you find them on the uplands. And also on the uplands, during the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, the climate was different. It was like a couple of degrees warmer. So there was lighter tree cover up there. So it was easier for the first farmers to clear the trees, where the valleys had thicker forest. So it was easier for them farming up there. And then with climate change, 3,500 years ago or so, it became wet and it was depopulation. So that's why you get a lot of those old walls up there,
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like you said, a big one would be dividing up properties, because land, even if it's rocky, is always cherished around here. I have another interesting question. Just on the shelter walls was quite interesting as well. I was told by a farmer in the Burren, if you ever want shelter from a typical clear shower, that lean in behind the wall but not too close to it. stay out about a foot or two so you don't get to drip, but that'll give you great shelter. So walls are very important for livestock and shelter as well. But a very interesting question from Dennis Lavelle. Have you studied similarities and differences in wall building styles and techniques in various karst areas of the world?
Be honest with you, Brendan, no. Dennis, I should say, I haven't really. As I say, what really needs to be done, I think, myself, is an audit of the walls we have in the Burren, even probably even wider, even I'm sure Ken would tell you. But in the Burren, if we could do an audit sometimes of the wall, a study of what we have, try some reconstruction with some of these mound walls in different places, and see, can we sort of just pick maybe a couple of square miles of Burren and see all the different types of walls. That's for the future again. But as myself, I only know from what I've done in building myself for places I've gone and visit myself. I'm a stonemason and tour guide, so that would be for a full-on program or study.
Yeah, great. Before I pass back to Pranjali, I might plug the fact that the next number of Burren tea talks over the next few months will be from different karst areas around the world, in Newfoundland and Sweden and Slovenia and Yorkshire Dales and the Cavan Burren. So we'll be able to ask presenters individually at that point. So back over to you, Pranjali, maybe for more questions.
Can I tell you one small story before? Sorry.
You were saying something, Rory?
Can I tell you one small story? Just for particularly our diaspora around the world who are tuning in. I know there's a lot of people from the comments from different parts of the world. And of course, Riverdance. Did you know we wouldn't have Riverdance only for the stone walls? This was a story told by Professor Caulfield down the Cage of Fields. Riverdance, it came about due to the stone walls. And the reason behind that is Mayo had a Mayo 5,000 years old. Now, around the time, it's just after the millennium in Dublin, 1,000 years of Dublin. And Mayo were not going to be beaten by Dublin this time. So they decided to have 5,000 years of Mayo. And they based that 5,000 years on the Cage of Fields, which are 5,500 years old. So they launched this year celebration. They said to have a piece of music and dance. And they brought in Maya Doherty and Bill Whelan and all Gene Butler and Michael Flatley in the cast of what was to be Riverdance to do this little production of music. So that was a huge success. The next year, the Eurovision Song Contest was on. So they brought the same team back together to the interval act, and next thing Riverdance was born. So without the stone walls in the Cage of Fields, you wouldn't have had Mayo 5,000. And without Mayo 5,000, you wouldn't have had the interval act at Eurovision. And without that, you wouldn't have had Riverdance. So you can thank